Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Note to Shelf. So, it's been a little while since I've seen the third installment of the Knives Out series, Wake Up Dead Man. In that movie, there was like a mystery book club. There was a list of 5 mystery books having to do with locked room mysteries. I thought it would be cool to read those same books and kind of like see if we can solve them together and give a little review. And I've only just now have been able to get my hands on all the books on the list. So this first one, I won't try to solve it simply because I've actually read it before in middle school, and I happen to remember who done it. It's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. A little bit about me. This book was my first Agatha Christie book, not my introduction to her and Hercule Poirot. That was through this Xbox video game based off of the ABC murders. That was actually my first introduction. And then I was informed how Agatha Christie and Hercule Poirot were my grandpa's favorite book series. I'm like, oh, they're books? And so, of course, I had to go look for some of Agatha Christie's works at the library. And The Murder of Roger Ackroyd was the first one that I found and picked up, and that was a lot of fun. This one, I decided to just do the review for, like I said, because I happen to remember who done it. This is one of those ones where I do think you don't want spoilers for this one. I think it's very surprising how it turns out. So I definitely recommend reading it on your own. I will say, on a reread, especially so many years after I first read it, because like I said, I read this in like middle school. A lot of like the details I didn't remember. And so honestly, there was a part of me that wondered if I was even reading the same book, like if I was reading the correct book or not. But I was. I thought it was interesting that despite knowing the answer, despite knowing who done it, I still found myself suspecting other people. I think our suspect did a good job of covering his tracks, I guess. This time, I was able to see, bits of information that I'm like, you're probably lying right now. Even with all of that, I think I was still rather convinced otherwise. But like that's not to say that as the reader like you're lied to, like you're given all the information, but like there's like just enough trickery involved, I guess, that leads to the surprising twist. But yeah, definitely I think that one you should read on your own. No spoilers. Otherwise, another thing I noticed was the humor in the book. I don't remember it being quite so funny when I was younger, but maybe I just didn't get the humor back then. I don't know. That was another fun little thing to rediscover. Next up, I will be reading Agatha Christie's The Murder at the Vicarage. I believe that this is the first story that her detective Miss Marple appears in. I actually haven't read any of the Miss Marple stories except for a couple of short stories here and there in a like Agatha Christie short story collection. Other than that, I haven't read any of her books. I've been, over the years working my way through the Hercule Poirot books. But yeah, so definitely excited to get into this one and see what our Miss Marple gets up to. And I will see you with an update. Okay, I've gotten through 6 chapters of The Murder at the Vicarage so far, and up to this point, we've been introduced to our list of suspects, and I've written down, kind of like the main suspects. Okay, first up, we have Len Clement, who is the vicar, and he is our narrator. His wife is Griselda, and their nephew Dennis is also staying with them. There is Colonel Prothero, who, quite obvious from the moment he's mentioned that he's going to be the one killed. He does become our victim later on. And he has a wife, his second wife, Anne Prothero, and he has a daughter, Lettuce. It's quite an unfortunate name. Then we have Hawes, who is the curate at the church. We don't know too much else about him. There is a Mrs. Lestrange, who is a neighbor who moved in. I don't know how recently, but she seems to never come out of her house. And the only person who seems to visit is the doctor. And so he might know something about her. But otherwise, she's a bit of a mystery. And then there is a Dr. Stone, who is an archaeologist who has come to do some digging at Colonel Prothero's house. There's like a burial site at his house. And then he brought with him his secretary, Miss Cram. And there's Lawrence Redding, an artist in the area. The Clements, the vicar and his family don't seem too suspicious so far, besides kind of joking about wanting there to be a robbery or a murder just to liven things up. But you know how some people are. Other than that, I don't find them too suspicious yet. With Prothero himself, it seems everybody wants him dead. Like, even our vicar, we open up with him saying he wished he was dead. Like, suffice to say, he's not liked very much, so it's not surprising that he ended up dead. He's not the nicest person. As we can see, with his own daughter, Lettuce, she finds it hard living with him, and how he doesn't seem to want to give her any money, and so she thinks it'd be better off if he died so she could get money. Also, her father wouldn't let Lawrence, the artist, paint her in her bathing suit, and he was like, nope, that's not happening. So that's possible motive. And because of that, the town is suspecting that they have a thing going on between them. But surprise, surprise, Lawrence actually has a thing with Mrs. Prothero. They're having an affair. And, they say that they're in love with each other. And so that's one motive for the two of them. And so far, I believe only the vicar knows about their secret relationship. He caught them. Another point of interest, everybody thinks that Dr. Stone is having an affair with his secretary, Miss Cram. But nobody has any real proof of that. We haven't actually officially met them in the story. But they do say that Dr. Stone had an argument with Prothero about, digging on Prothero's property. So that's some potential motive there. But like I said, we haven't officially met Dr. Stone yet, so I'm not sure where this is going to lead yet. And then Mrs. Lestrange seems to know something. She's worried about something, but she hasn't divulged this information yet. But something's up there, but we don't know what it is yet. And so now we get to the point Colonel Prothero has been killed. Colonel Prothero was supposed to meet with the vicar, in his study to go over the books. He's suspecting that there's been some money fraud with the church, so he wants to go over the books with the vicar. Before they're supposed to meet, though, the vicar gets a call asking him to meet with one of his parishioners because they're dying. So he goes there, but it turns out that everything was fine, so it was strange that he got a call like that. So he's on his way back, he's later than he expects, and on his way back, he sees Lawrence leaving from the study window at the vicarage. And, Lawrence seems very distraught, very suspicious, right? But the vicar goes to the house and then finds Colonel Prothero dead, shot in the back of the head. And at this point, he does seem the most likely suspect. He hasn't brought this up to the police yet, but as the case develops, eventually Lawrence does get arrested because he turned himself in. And so the vicar's not very surprised by this turn of events. So he seems the most likely suspect. And even Griselda went to see Mrs. Prothero to comfort her, like, after the bad news of her husband dying. And she reports back to the vicar that Mrs. Prothero was asking if anybody had been caught yet, if anybody, has been suspected, but at the same time being rather calm about things. And so it makes it seem like one of them did it. They seem like the strongest suspects, the most obvious suspects. But I suspect that they aren't the ones who did it. I think Lawrence just happened to stumble across the body, and I think it likely he believes that Anne committed the murder. And then that's why he's turned himself in order to protect her. That's what I'm thinking so far. Because I do think if it were either one of them, that seems a little too obvious right now. I mean, of course, I could be surprised later in the book, but right now, that's where I'm at. They seem most likely, but I think they're a little too obvious. But even so, I'm not sure who did commit the murder in that case. Like, if not them, then who? I'm not sure yet, but we will find out. I will come back with an update later. Okay, so I'm 67% of the way through the book now, and we haven't figured out much, but I do have some theories, and I was able to narrow down my personal suspect list. So, like I mentioned before, the most obvious suspects were Lawrence Redding, the artist, and the wife of the victim, Anne. But they're in the clear. It turns out that they were together during the time of the murder. They didn't actually go into the study, and Miss Marple herself saw them at the time. So I think it's safe to say that they were not the culprits. They are off the list. However, it is very clear that whoever is the true murderer, they are trying hard to frame them. One of the clues that we have are phone calls. I don't remember if I mentioned it, but the vicar got a phone call saying that one of his parishioners was having some trouble with his health, that he please come down to the house. And so he did. But when he got there, they were like, "Oh no, everything's fine. I didn't call you. Like, I don't know what you're talking about." And so it sounds like that this was a fake call made by the murderer in order to get the vicar away from the house. And they were able to trace the phone call from the North Lodge at the victim's house, Mr. Prothero's house. And that is where Lawrence was originally. He was using that space to paint the portrait of Lettuce. But apparently, it's possible that the murderer didn't know that they were no longer continuing the portrait of Lettuce because of the argument he had with Colonel Prothero. But on top of that, there was a second phone call that seemed to be like a prank phone call to one of the old ladies in town who was also right, next door to the vicarage. She got this nasty phone call, about how she was such a gossip or whatever, I will sue you or something like that. And they traced that phone call to Lawrence's cottage. These phone calls being places where Lawrence would be, and also the fact that Lawrence's own gun was used as the murder weapon. It's obvious he's being framed. Apparently, he doesn't lock his door. So it's like anybody could have gone in there. And they suspect that these phone calls were made by the murderer, by the same person. The first phone call being to get the vicar out of the way. And the second one happened right before the gunshot was heard. Everybody thought they heard the gunshot in the woods. That's like right behind the house. And I think the police suspect that that phone call was to get the old lady, Mrs. Price Ridley, to get her from looking out the window and seeing anybody, because she's in like a prime position to see anybody who comes in and out of the house. But if you get her away from the window and to the phone, then somebody could walk in. And because of that, especially because that second phone call happened sometime right before the shot. Because of that, I suspect that this is the work of two people. I'm not sure which two people quite yet, but I think it highly likely that one person was making these phone calls while the other one was doing the murder. So that's one of my theories. So now I guess I'll go through my list of suspects, like kind of from the most to least likely. These are people that I think could have done it. And so one of the first suspects is Lettuce. Besides Anne, she seems to be the one who would gain the most out of her father's death, getting the inheritance from his will. But also, there was a scene just now. Apparently, she's trying to frame her stepmother, Anne, for the murder. Like, she planted one of her earrings in the study. The vicar caught her because he saw both of those earrings when he was with the police to question Anne the day after the murder. He knows that she's, faking it all, right? But that's no real proof that she has done anything, other than try to frame her stepmother. But that is highly suspicious. So she is still up there. Also, her alibi so far has been she was at a tennis party in the next town over and she was with Dennis. But Dennis revealed to the vicar that Lettuce actually left the party early and he stayed longer, right? So it's like, oh, she doesn't really have an alibi. But neither does Dennis. Now, the thing with Dennis, I really don't see him being the murderer unless he is the accomplice with Lettuce. He has confessed he has a thing for Lettuce, and he has said, like, oh, I'd do anything for her. And so while I don't think he would kill Colonel Prothero, I do think he would have helped Lettuce. Whether or not he was aware of it, because it could have been like, oh, you stay at the party with me, and if anybody asks, say I was there, or can you make this phone call for me? I don't know how it worked out. That's the only way I can see Dennis being part of the murder, as if he was the accomplice. He was not the mastermind, though. Now, my next top suspect, is Mrs. Lestrange. One, like, she's got this secret, and she wanted to tell the vicar, but like she hesitated the first time, and then the second time the inspector came in and started asking her questions, and she's like, you know what, never mind, I'm not going to tell you, I've made my decision, I don't need your advice anymore, right? So we still don't know her secret. What we do know, however, is that she paid Colonel Prothero a visit the night before the murder at a weird time, like around dinner time. So it was like kind of a weird time to go visit somebody. And she only wanted to see the colonel, not his wife or the daughter. They made it sound like that's why she chose dinner time. And we don't know exactly what they were talking about, but one of the servants did happen to overhear because Colonel Prothero was slightly deaf, so he talked very loudly. So they were able to hear this part of the conversation. And he said something along the lines of, it's been so many years, how could you come here? No, I won't let you see her. I can't believe this, things like that. And the police are suspecting blackmail, that Mrs. Lestrange was blackmailing Colonel Prothero. But then it's like, why would she kill the colonel? And they assume that that's why the colonel was like, I won't let you see her. It's like, I won't let you see my wife so you can like tell her the truth or whatever. That's why they suspect blackmail. But however, and I could be totally wrong, but I suspect that maybe Mrs. Lestrange could actually be Colonel Prothero's first wife, because remember, Anne is his second wife. And it was established that his first wife didn't die, she left him. So I suspect that she is his first wife and has come back and is maybe wanting to see Lettuce, her daughter, right? And that's who Colonel Prothero meant. I could be totally wrong, but I do suspect that. And I think it could be possible, this might be even more of a stretch, but like if my accomplice theory is right, then I think it could be possible that she told Lettuce or like Lettuce found out and then they were working together to kill Colonel Prothero. I think that's a possible combination if my accomplice theory is correct. My next suspect is Dr. Haydock. I mean, overall, he doesn't seem that suspicious, but like there was this scene where he was talking with the vicar. Like he's saying things like if he knew the murderer, he might not give the murderer away. That's kind of like his, based off of his like belief system or whatever. Like depending on like if he knows the murderer and like maybe knows why they did it, he might be inclined to protect the murderer. That's kind of like floating around. So I think, even if he's not the murderer, he might know who is. And so he's like an accomplice in that way. And if that's the case, then I think it's possible that it's Mrs. Lestrange. And he knows that and he's protecting her. Like maybe he knows her secret, whatever that may be. This could be nothing, but I did think it a possibility because when the murder was discovered, the vicar called the doctor right away and he examined the body and determined the time of death. Now, this was about like 7 o'clock at night when they discovered the body. And at that time, he determined that the murder had taken place about 30 minutes before. So, like, the time range for his death is like 6:20 to 6:35 at the late. Like, that is the time frame. And he is adamant about that time frame. He was like, no, it can't be any earlier, it can't be any later. That is the time frame. And he's like, I know what I'm talking about. I'm a doctor. I didn't think anything of it at first, but he also, like, there was an inquest and he said the same thing. And it was like, it had to be in this time frame. He was still like, it had to be this time. And so then I was like, well, what if he's lying? They kind of question if that was the time frame at first, but he was like, no, I'm a medically trained professional. Like, I know what I'm talking about. That is the time of death, right? And then after that, they're like, okay, like, you're right. But like, what if he is lying? Because he did it, right? He could be so adamant about the time in order to like kind of give himself an alibi and like nobody's questioning him because he's a doctor and he knows what he's talking about. So I did see that as a possibility. But I really don't know for sure either way. My next two suspects are Dr. Stone and Miss Cram, his secretary. It turns out, though, that the man that they know to be Dr. Stone is an imposter because Miss Marple's nephew has come to visit and they brought up Dr. Stone. And the nephew was like, oh, I know him. He's a nice fellow. And then the vicar was like, oh, you actually ran into him because Dr. Stone had to go back to London for the weekend, on some business. And the vicar took him to the train station, and that's when they ran into Miss Marple's nephew because he had just come into town. And the nephew was like, no, I ran into you and like some other man, not Dr. Stone. And, it was like, but that was Dr. Stone. I was like, no, like Dr. Stone looks nothing like that. So it's like, oh, the Dr. Stone that we know is an imposter. But I'm not entirely sure that he is the murderer because Miss Marple brought up, this thing that she remembered from the past about a man who pretended to be a gas inspector and it was like robbing from the houses he visited, before he got caught. And, there was a moment earlier where she was talking about how oftentimes if something reminds her of like a previous event, oftentimes that means that this current event is likely a similar thing to the thing that she's reminded of. So like maybe not necessarily, but because of that, I think maybe that's why this fake Dr. Stone is here. Like, he's pretending to be an archaeologist so that he could steal from Colonel Prothero, because I do believe he was a rather rich man. So I don't know that he would necessarily be there to murder the colonel unless he was found out and he had to get rid of the colonel, but then why do it at the vicarage? I don't know. I don't know though if Miss Cram, the secretary, would have been in on it. Like, if she's in on the con or not. But like, if one of them, like if Dr. Stone is the murderer, I think it likely that Miss Cram would be the potential accomplice in that scenario. But it's like, I really don't know for sure. And then Miss Cram herself has been a little suspicious. Like I said, Dr. Stone is away for the weekend. So Anne invited Miss Cram to stay with her for the weekend at the house to help her with, like letters and stuff and like preparing for the funeral. And apparently it was the night that she came where Anne thought she heard a noise in the attic, and when she went up there to check, she found a portrait that was slashed to be unrecognizable. They brought up the possibility that it was Miss Cram who could have done it, but I don't know why she would have done it. I don't know what that means. But I do suspect that that portrait might have been a portrait of the colonel's first wife. And so, if I'm correct in thinking that Mrs. Lestrange is the first wife, then I do think it's possible that maybe she came and slashed the portrait so that nobody could look at it and recognize her. But I don't know when she would have gone to the house to do that. Of course, I guess this was like 3 in the morning when Anne thought she heard somebody in the attic. I don't know what that could mean either way. And that's it for my suspects. There is one other thing to note, however, that Griselda, the vicar's wife, on the day of the murder, she was out in London at the time. She came back on the 6:50 train. And remember that the murder was supposed to have taken place at around like 6:20, 6:30. And so it's like she was on the train. She's not a suspect, right? However, when the vicar went to the train station with the fake Dr. Stone, he ran into the chemist, and they got to talking. And the chemist was talking about how on Thursday, the night of the murder, he was on he was supposed to take the 6:50 train back home, but it was 30 minutes late. So instead of coming at 6:50, like if I'm understanding this correctly, instead of coming at 6:50, it didn't come until 7:20. So really, Griselda should have come home sometime after 7:20. And now, like, that might not seem like anything, but I went back to the start, like when the murder was discovered and the inspector first came, because a clock was found broken on the scene. They were using that to try to help pinpoint the time of death and like when the murderer could have been there. And the inspector like was saying like it's like right now it is 7:05. I was informed of the murder at 6:55, seeing if like the colonel being killed like 30 minutes ago was correct. At this point, it's 7:05, right? And it's sometime right after this conversation, the vicar leaves the room and is informed by the maid that his wife has just returned about 5 minutes ago. And so, like, even if this was at like 7:20, that would have meant that she arrived at like 7:15. If I have my times correct, then I think she was at home before 7:20. But if the train was late, like the chemist said, and came at 7:20, there's no way she could have come there before 7:20, but she did. So like if all the times are correct in my head and I'm not confused, I do believe that Griselda was not on that 6:50 train like she said she was. Maybe she came home like on an earlier train. I really don't think that she is either the murderer or the accomplice, just because I don't know why she would. I can't see it. But I do think, it must be something else. Don't know why though. But like I said, this is just assuming I'm not confused. I could be totally wrong about this. But then, like, why would that be mentioned in the story? Like, the vicar didn't pay any attention to it. But, like, as the reader, it's like, why would that be mentioned? So I think that's an important clue. Who was supposed to come home at the 6:50 train? Griselda. So does that mean she's not, like, she doesn't actually have an alibi like we thought she did? But nobody else has picked up on this. Like, it's just me. And it's like I said, I might be wrong. Like, I might have all the times confused. So, like, maybe she could have been home. That's all that I have so far. I can't really pinpoint anything just yet, but those are my current suspicions. So I will keep on reading and see what happens. I just finished the book. And oh my gosh, was I wrong? Well, wrong and right. I'll get to that. But it turns out it was Lawrence Redding and Anne. The two people who were so obvious they couldn't be the ones to do it. It was too obvious. Because I do think if it were either one of them, that seems a little too obvious right now. I mean, of course, I could be surprised later in the book. They were the ones who committed the murder, and they used that to their advantage. That's how they did it. Like, they turned themselves in and everything, to make it look like, oh, like, I thought the other one did it, and I'm turning myself in to protect them. And because they did that, and like, they so cleverly gave themselves an alibi, making sure that Miss Marple would see them. They tricked everybody. That's crazy. It turns out they did use a silencer on the pistol, and then used like an explosive device in the woods to be the shot that everybody else heard. That was crazy. I couldn't believe it. I will say though, I was glad to know that it was accomplices. They were in it together. And also, I was correct in thinking that Griselda was not on the 6:50 train. Like she said, she came home earlier, but that was for a completely unrelated reason. She made the phone call to the old lady, Mrs. Price Ridley. She made that prank call to try to scare her because apparently she was, spreading bad rumors about the vicar. And so that's what that was, and totally unrelated from the murder. It just happened to be at the same time as that explosive shot that everybody heard. And then also, I was in fact correct in thinking that Mrs. Lestrange was Lettuce's mother, the Colonel Prothero's first wife. So I'm glad that I was able to figure out some things, but the main murder I did not see coming. They were innocent in my mind from the beginning. I think it really goes to show that Agatha Christie really is the queen of mysteries, and it was fun. It's always so fun hearing the little explanation at the end of a whodunit mystery and seeing like what each of the puzzle pieces are and how they fit together. It's always so satisfying. Whether you figure it out or not, it's always satisfying to read. But yeah, so that was The Murder at the Vicarage. That was a lot of fun. Okay, so I'm going to actually stop the video here just because I don't want it to end up being too long, since I'm, going over the clues and the theories of the stories. So the other three books on the mystery book club list I will leave for another video. I'm not sure yet if it'll be one more video or it might be two more videos. I'm not sure. We'll see how it works out. But in the meantime, do let me know what you thought of this video. Give me, any feedback, what I could have done better, or if you don't like this kind of video at all. I will say, like, if you don't like it, I probably will finish the other two videos just because I have them. But after that, if you don't want to see anymore, I won't do it. But let me know how I did in this video, if you liked it, or if there was anything I could improve upon with this type of solve the mystery with me kind of video. I am finding it kind of difficult to know how to balance out like how much information, like how much context I need to give without giving away like too many details. So it's like I don't know, like did I not give enough, or was it just right? I don't know. Let me know what you thought about this video, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye.